My life, for the most part, had been a tapestry woven with threads of quiet contentment, hard work, and the unwavering love for my small family. I am Sarah, and for 35 years I shared an unbreakable bond with my husband, Robert. He was the anchor to my sometimes restless spirit, a man of profound kindness and an almost childlike trust in the good of others. Together, we had built a life from scratch, brick by painstaking brick. We weren't wealthy in the eyes of the world, but we had accumulated a comfortable nest egg, a beautiful home filled with memories, and most importantly, a son, Michael, who was the light of our lives. Michael was our only child, and like many parents, we poured every ounce of our affection, our hopes, and our resources into nurturing him. We made sacrifices without a second thought, ensuring he had the best education, the opportunities we never did, and a childhood free from want. He grew into a charming, intelligent young man, and we were immensely proud. We envisioned a future where he would thrive, build his own happy family, and perhaps one day we'd all gather around the same dinner table, sharing stories and laughter. Then Jessica entered our lives. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with an air of sophisticated confidence that initially captivated Michael, and, I admit, even somewhat impressed Robert and me. She came from a family of considerable means, a world away from our modest, hard-working background. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, were prominent figures in the city's social elite, their names synonymous with old money and powerful connections. At first, we were thrilled for Michael. We believed he had found someone who could challenge him, inspire him, and make him truly happy. We welcomed Jessica with open arms, eager to blend our families to expand our circle of love. But the initial sparkle of Jessica's charm soon began to tarnish, revealing a colder, more calculating core. The subtle shifts began almost imperceptibly. Michael, once so grounded and thoughtful, started to change. He became preoccupied with appearances, with status, with the endless pursuit of a lifestyle he hadn't grown up with. Jessica subtly but persistently encouraged this. Our cozy home, once a sanctuary, was suddenly deemed quaint or a bit dated. Our carefully planned holidays were boring compared to the Sterling's lavish trips abroad. Our advice, once valued, became old-fashioned or out of touch. I tried to dismiss these changes as the growing pains of a young couple finding their way, adapting to a new dynamic. But a knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. Jessica's visits became less about connecting with us and more about showcasing her latest designer acquisition or subtly hinting at financial needs. Michael, always quick to defend her, would often echo her sentiments, making us feel like we were somehow failing him, not providing enough. Then came the loans. The first one was for a business opportunity Jessica's cousin was involved in. It was a substantial sum, enough to make Robert and me pause, but Michael assured us it was a sure thing, a chance for him to finally establish himself financially, independent of his in-law's shadow. We scraped together the money from our retirement savings, believing we were investing in our son's future. The opportunity vanished, as did the money. No apologies, just a shrug from Michael, and a dismissive wave from Jessica, who declared it part of doing business. More emergencies followed. A sudden need for a down payment on a new car because their old one was unreliable, despite it being perfectly fine. An urgent request for funds to cover unexpected medical bills for Jessica's aunt, which later turned out to be a cosmetic procedure. Each time, the pressure mounted. Jessica's parents, the Sterlings, would subtly reinforce the narrative, implying that as Michael's parents, it was our duty to support our son and his wife. Their words, delivered with a veneer of polite concern, carried an insidious weight, making us feel small, inadequate, and obligated. Robert, bless his gentle heart, was particularly susceptible to their manipulations. He adored Michael and couldn't bear the thought of him struggling. He truly believed he was helping his son. I, on the other hand, grew increasingly suspicious. I saw the glint in Jessica's eyes, the way she would subtly shift conversations towards our finances, our assets, our modest investment portfolio, our fully paid-off home, the small plot of land Robert had inherited from his father. These were all discussed with an almost predatory interest. I tried to voice my concerns to Robert, but he would gently brush them aside, attributing my worries to a mother's natural anxiety. Michael, when confronted, would become defensive, accusing me of not trusting him, of being negative. The rift between us, once a hairline fracture, was now a visible crack. My work often required me to travel. I was a regional manager for a small but growing company, and these trips, though tiring, were essential for our financial security. It was during one such trip, a particularly grueling 2-week stint managing a new branch opening several states away, that the true extent of their depravity unfolded. I had left Robert in charge of the house, with strict instructions to be careful, to not let anyone pressure him. He promised he would. He always did. I was due back on a Saturday, but a last-minute cancellation of a crucial meeting meant I could catch an earlier flight home, arriving Friday afternoon. I decided to surprise Robert. I envisioned him greeting me at the door, his face lighting up with his usual warm smile, a comforting embrace after weeks apart. The thought filled me with a quiet joy as the taxi pulled up to our familiar driveway. The house looked quiet, almost too quiet. I paid the driver, retrieved my luggage, and walked up the path, the scent of blooming jasmine a familiar comfort. As I reached the front door, I heard it, a low, guttural sound, like a wounded animal. It was muffled but unmistakably human. My heart leaped into my throat. Robert. Something was terribly wrong. I fumbled with my keys, my hands suddenly clumsy, and pushed the door open. The sound grew clearer, agonizingly so. It was crying. Deep, heart-wrenching sobs that shook the very foundation of our home. I dropped my bags, my mind racing through 1,000 terrible scenarios. An accident, a medical emergency, a death in the family. I followed the sound, my feet light on the carpeted stairs, my breath held tight in my chest. It led me to Robert's study, a room usually filled with the quiet hum of his hobbies, the scent of old books. The door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly, hesitantly, and there he was. Robert, my strong, gentle Robert, hunched over his desk, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably, his face buried in his hands. The sight ripped through me, a raw wound of pain and fear. But then, a different sound pierced the air. Laughter. Not the joyful, genuine laughter I cherished, but a cold, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. It came from the living room, just beyond the study. My son, Michael, and with him, the unmistakable voices of Jessica and her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. They were laughing while my husband, their father and father-in-law, wept inconsolably in the next room. The world tilted. The air grew thick, suffocating. A cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a fury I had never known. I walked into the living room, my presence unnoticed at first. Michael was sprawled on our sofa, a smirk on his face, a glass of what looked like expensive scotch in his hand. Jessica was beside him, her arm linked through his, her eyes gleaming with a malicious triumph. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling sat opposite them, regal and self-satisfied, sipping tea from our antique cups, their expressions smug. "What's so funny?" My voice, though a whisper, cut through their mirth like a shard of ice. They froze, their laughter dying in their throats. Michael's eyes widened, a flicker of panic in their depths. Jessica's perfect smile faltered. The Sterlings looked up, their composure briefly shattered, before quickly reforming into an arrogant disdain. "Mom? You're back early," Michael stammered, scrambling to sit upright, the scotch splashing onto our rug. He looked like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, but his guilt was laced with something far more sinister. "Yes, I am," I said, my gaze sweeping over them, lingering on Jessica's smug face, then on the Sterlings, who looked utterly unperturbed by my sudden appearance. "And it seems I've walked in on quite the party. A celebration, perhaps, while my husband is in there, broken and crying?" My voice rose with each word, the tremor of controlled rage barely contained. Robert, hearing my voice, slowly emerged from the study, his face swollen and streaked with tears, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a profound despair. He looked utterly defeated, a shadow of the man I knew. His gaze met mine, and in it I saw not just sorrow, but a deep, crushing shame. "Sarah," he choked out, his voice raw. "What have you done to him?" I demanded, my eyes fixed on Michael. He flinched, but Jessica, ever the viper, stepped forward. "Oh, please, Sarah. Robert is just being overly dramatic. He's always been a bit emotional, hasn't he?" she simpered, her voice dripping with condescension. "Dramatic?" I scoffed, the word tasting like ash. "He's devastated. What did you do? What did you make him sign?" The Sterlings exchanged a knowing glance, their expressions confirming my worst fears. Michael remained silent, avoiding my gaze, his complicity a searing brand. Robert, unable to hold it in any longer, collapsed onto a nearby armchair, burying his face in his hands once more. "They took everything, Sarah," he sobbed, his words muffled. "Our savings, the house, the land, they made me sign it all over. Michael, he said it was for our future, for a family trust Jessica's father was setting up. He said it would protect us, grow our wealth. But it was a lie, Sarah, all of it. They pressured me day and night while you were gone. They threatened to cut Michael off, to ruin his career if I didn't cooperate. I thought I was helping him. I thought—" His voice trailed off into heart-wrenching cries. My blood ran cold, my vision blurred, then sharpened with an incandescent rage. Our life's work, our future, stolen, not by strangers, but by our own son, manipulated by his greedy wife and her unscrupulous parents. Michael, my son, stood there, a silent accomplice, his face a mask of pathetic cowardice. He had not only allowed this to happen, but had actively participated in the emotional torture of his own father. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously calm, each word a hammer blow. "All of you, get out of my house, now." Jessica scoffed. "Your house? I think you'll find it's technically Michael's now, Sarah, and by extension, ours." Robert was very generous with his trust.
That was it. The final insolent jab. The mask of controlled fury shattered. I lunged at Jessica, my hands reaching for her, a primal scream tearing from my throat. Robert, despite his despair, rose to pull me back, his strength surprising. The Sterlings, however, looked genuinely alarmed, rising from their seats, their smugness replaced by a flicker of fear. Michael, finally showing some semblance of life, grabbed Jessica and pulled her behind him. "You will regret this day, all of you," I hissed, my voice shaking with raw emotion. "You will regret ever setting foot in our lives. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The Sterlings, seeing the genuine, unhinged fury in my eyes, decided not to push their luck. They ushered Michael and Jessica out, their hasty retreat a small victory in a sea of despair. As they left, Jessica threw one last sneer over her shoulder. "You have nothing, old woman, nothing," she spat. For the next few days, I moved through life in a fog of disbelief and agony. Robert was a broken man, his spirit crushed. He blamed himself, his trusting nature, his desire to please Michael. I held him, comforted him, but inside, a cold, hard resolve was forming. They thought they had won. They thought they had left us with nothing. But they had underestimated one crucial thing: a mother's fury, ignited by the betrayal of her child and the suffering of her husband. I was not a woman to be trifled with, especially when my family was threatened. My career had taught me resilience, strategic thinking, and the art of navigating complex situations. I might not have had their money or their connections, but I had something far more potent: a burning desire for justice and an unwavering will to fight. I spent hours online, researching, making phone calls. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Vance, known for her tenacity in cases of fraud and elder abuse. Evelyn listened patiently as I recounted the entire sordid tale, her expression grim. "Sarah," she said, her voice firm, "this is not going to be easy. These people are powerful, and they've covered their tracks well. But," she leaned forward, a glint in her eye, "there are always cracks, and a mother's intuition, combined with a husband's testimony, can be a powerful weapon." She outlined a strategy.
We needed to prove duress, undue influence, and potentially fraud. We needed evidence, any shred of proof that Robert wasn't of sound mind or was coerced into signing those documents. My mind, once clouded with grief, became a steel trap. I recalled every conversation, every subtle threat, every manipulative tactic employed by Jessica and the Sterlings. I remembered how Robert had been isolated, how they had insisted he handle financial matters alone while I was away, dismissing my involvement. I remembered the vague promises of a family trust that never materialized, the documents Robert was rushed to sign without proper legal review under the guise of time-sensitive opportunities. Evelyn and I worked tirelessly. We pieced together a timeline, gathered bank statements, property deeds, and any correspondence that hinted at their scheme. It was slow, painstaking work, often frustrating, but I refused to give up. Robert, slowly, began to regain some of his strength, fueled by my determination. He started remembering details, small moments of pressure, veiled threats against Michael if he didn't comply. He even recalled being given a strong sedative by Jessica, disguised as a stress reliever, on the day he signed the most critical documents, leaving him disoriented and compliant. This was the crack we needed. Evelyn immediately filed a lawsuit, alleging fraud, undue influence, and elder abuse. The Sterlings, confident in their power and connections, initially dismissed it as a frivolous attempt by a desperate woman. They sent their high-priced lawyers to intimidate us, to offer paltry settlements, to drag the case through endless delays. But I was unwavering. I refused every offer, my resolve hardening with each condescending sneer from their legal team. I also started making discreet inquiries through my own professional network. My job involved understanding market dynamics and financial flows. I knew people, not in the Sterling's elite circle, but in the trenches of business, who might have heard whispers, seen patterns. It turned out the Sterling's wealth, while substantial, wasn't as pristine as they projected. There were rumors of shady dealings, leveraged buyouts that skirted ethical lines, and a history of exploiting vulnerable small businesses. They were ruthless, and their greed knew no bounds. One contact, an old colleague who had once done some due diligence on a company the Sterlings were interested in, gave me a crucial tip: a shell corporation in a tax haven, used to funnel funds and obscure ownership. It was a long shot, but Evelyn, with her legal acumen, saw a potential link. If we could prove they were using Robert's assets to fuel illicit activities, their entire empire could crumble. We leaked anonymous tips to financial journalists, hinting at the Sterlings' dubious practices. We ensured that the story of our family's betrayal, of a son turning on his parents for greed, found its way into local gossip columns and online forums. It wasn't about public shaming, not yet, but about creating enough noise and enough scrutiny to make the Sterlings uncomfortable, to make them realize that their perfect, untouchable facade was cracking. The pressure began to build. The media, sniffing a scandal involving prominent figures, started digging. Regulators, alerted by the anonymous tips, initiated preliminary investigations into the Sterlings' financial dealings. Their carefully constructed world of influence began to wobble. Jessica, once so confident, became increasingly agitated. Michael, caught between his parents' wrath and his in-laws' crumbling empire, looked utterly lost, a pathetic puppet. He tried to reach out, to apologize, but it was too late. The wound he inflicted was too deep, the betrayal too profound. During discovery, Evelyn's team uncovered irrefutable evidence of the sedative administered to Robert, backed by medical records and Jessica's own casual mention in text messages to Michael about making sure Dad was relaxed. We also found discrepancies in the family trust documents, which were in fact cleverly disguised transfers of ownership directly to Jessica and Michael, with the Sterlings as the ultimate beneficiaries, leaving Robert and me with absolutely no control or recourse. Armed with this overwhelming evidence, the tide turned dramatically. The Sterlings, facing not just a civil lawsuit but potential criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse, started to panic. Their lawyers, no longer arrogant, began to negotiate in earnest. They offered to return our assets, to compensate us for damages, to make it all go away. But I wasn't interested in just getting our money back. I wanted justice. I wanted them to pay, not just financially, but reputationally. Evelyn, seeing my unwavering resolve, pushed harder. We demanded not only the return of all our assets with interest, but also a public apology for Michael and Jessica, acknowledging their wrongdoing. We insisted on a significant additional sum for emotional distress, and crucially, we sought an injunction preventing them from ever attempting to contact us or interfere with our lives again. We also presented our findings about the Sterling shell corporations to the authorities, ensuring that their broader financial malfeasance would not go unpunished. The Sterlings, cornered and facing ruin, had no choice but to concede.
The settlement was massive, far exceeding what we had lost. Our home, our savings, our land, everything was returned, and then some. Michael and Jessica, stripped of their ill-gotten gains and facing social ostracism and potential legal repercussions themselves, were forced to issue a humiliating public apology, a hollow, begrudging statement that barely masked their resentment, but served its purpose. They were financially crippled, their grand lifestyle ambitions shattered, their reputation in tatters. The Sterling's empire, already under scrutiny, began to unravel. The investigations into their offshore accounts and shady business practices gained momentum, leading to indictments and the freezing of assets. Their social standing plummeted, their once powerful names now whispered with contempt. Justice, slow and arduous, was finally being served. It took years for Robert to fully heal, for the light to return to his eyes. But it did. We rebuilt our lives, stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The financial recovery was complete, but the emotional scars lingered. We mourned the loss of our son, not to death, but to greed and manipulation. Michael, last I heard, was struggling, having been cut off by the Sterlings and abandoned by Jessica, who quickly moved on to another prospect. He was a casualty of his own choices, a tragic reminder of what happens when ambition eclipses love and loyalty. Our home, once filled with the ghosts of betrayal, slowly became a sanctuary again. Robert and I found solace in each other, in the quiet rhythm of our days, in the simple joys of life. We learned that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or property deeds, but in the unwavering love and trust between two people. And I learned that a mother's love, once betrayed, can transform into a force of nature, capable of moving mountains and dismantling empires to protect what truly matters.